Detective Haider Graves leaned back in the plush chair of his small office, the dim light from a single desk lamp casting shadows across photo frames and awards lining the walls. His gaze drifted over the accolades. Cases closed, lives changed, justice served. Yet, as he stared, a familiar feeling of weariness settled in like an unwelcome guest, haunting reminders of unsolved cases that rested heavily on his conscience. The shrill ring of the phone broke the silence. Haider snapped to attention, bracing himself as Officer Patel's anxious voice filled the receiver. "Detective Graves, we need you at Oak Ridge Manor. There's been a murder." A knot tightened in his stomach. "A murder," he echoed, realizing the gravity of the situation. As he grabbed his coat and keys, adrenaline surged through him, tinged with apprehension. It had been months since he'd dealt with a case this intense. Navigating the winding roads that led to Oak Ridge Manor, Haider's mind raced. The estate, famed for its grandeur and aura of mystery, had been the backdrop of countless parties, laughter, and whispered secrets. He could still picture Eleanor Blackwood's commanding presence amidst the revelry during his earlier visits to the manor. This time, however, the laughter had been silenced. Upon arriving, he was greeted by the imposing structure, its elaborate architecture stark against the dusk sky. Yellow police tape fluttered in the wind, a somber warning that something horrific had taken place. As he stepped out of his car, the cold air wrapped around him like a shroud. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with tension. Officers moved swiftly, and he spotted Officer Patel. Inside, they found the body in the study. "Family members are all gathered there," Patel informed him, eyes wide with concern. Haider nodded and walked toward the study. The grandeur of the room, with its polished mahogany desk and leather-clad volumes, felt surreal. But as he approached the scene, all opulence faded, overshadowed by the grim sight before him. Richard Blackwood lay sprawled on the floor, his body motionless, marred by a pool of deep crimson soaking into the rich carpet. "Detective," a forensic officer called. "No weapon found. No forced entry." "Yet he's dead," Haider murmured, squatting to assess the scene. The positioning of the body suggested betrayal. Richard had been caught off guard by someone he knew. He turned toward the family, gathered anxiously in the adjacent parlor. Eleanor Blackwood, unyielding yet clearly shaken, stood alongside her daughter-in-law, Julia Sinclair, who clutched her arms protectively. Paul Blackwood, the youngest son, looked lost, eyes darting wildly as he absorbed the unfolding chaos. "Get the family together," Haider instructed Patel. "I need to speak with them." Eleanor's voice cut through the tension. "What happened to my son? Who would do this?" Haider absorbed her grief, masking his sympathy. "I need to establish a timeline. Where were you when it happened?" "Julia and I were in the theater room with guests," she replied, glancing at Julia, whose face was pale. "We didn't hear anything until we found him here." "We need to speak to Paul next," Haider assured, mentally noting the dynamics within the family. Was it familial loyalty or the burden of hidden betrayals that held them together? As he began questioning them separately, he soon discovered layers of complicated relationships. Julia, Richard's ex, still appeared emotionally tethered to him. Eleanor pressed for reassurance, desperation leaking through her composed exterior. Paul, overwhelmed, struggled to recount his actions. But amid their grief, something felt amiss, a dissonance he couldn't quite identify. Was it competing interests? A past full of bitterness and unresolved grievances? Haider sensed the unsettling undercurrents of the Blackwood family. Returning to the study, Haider noticed the broken glass from Richard's whiskey tumbler gleaming ominously. Something about it felt significant. Answers were lurking in plain sight. As he bent closer to inspect, the puzzle pieces began to shift. A flicker of movement caught his eye. Paul stood in the doorway, watching him with a mixture of dread and curiosity. "Detective, do you think—" Paul began, but his words faded into an anxious silence. "Do I think what?" Haider pressed gently, his instincts drawing him closer as he prepared to peel back the layers of this evolving story. "You can speak freely. There's no judgment here." "It just feels wrong," Paul stuttered, glancing between his mother and Julia. Richard never liked being at the center of attention. He just wanted to fade into the background. Haider locked eyes with him, recognizing the weight of regret and confusion. Everyone in the room wore masks of grief, yet one or more of them could be holding the dagger that claimed Richard's life, and as a detective, it was his job to uncover the truth, no matter where it led him. In the dim light of that fateful evening, Haider understood that the game of secrets had only just begun. The night that followed Richard's murder felt thick with tension, each family member wrapped in their own grief while distance grew sharper among them. Haider convened them once more in the study, where a team of investigators subtly combed through the remnants of the crime scene. The silence felt like an accusation, lingering in the air like smoke from a candle that had long since extinguished. "Let's get to the heart of this," Haider began, his voice calm but firm. "I need each of you to tell me your movements before Richard's body was found. This isn't just for the investigation. It's for you. Secrets have a way of festering, and I assure you they will only breed more pain." Eleanor, now appearing more fragile, stepped forward. "I already told you, it was just Julia and me in the theater room. We were planning a dinner. Richard knew I wanted to have everyone together to celebrate Paul's graduation next week." As Haider listened, he noticed the way her words trembled, the underlying current of defiance. "Julia, what about you?" "I was helping Eleanor. We discussed some last-minute arrangements for tonight." "Richard was off somewhere," Julia explained hesitantly, glancing nervously at Paul. "Where exactly?" Haider pressed. Julia faltered. "I don't know. He sometimes took time to himself." "What do you mean?" Paul chimed in. "Richard could have been in the game room or reading. He did need his time alone more often than not." The protectiveness in Paul's voice shifted into defensiveness. Haider studied the room, keenly aware of their changing expressions. "And you, Paul? Where were you? After your mother and Julia left, what did you do?" Paul shifted, overwhelmed by guilt. "I was in my room, just trying to relax before dinner." "Did you hear anything? Any strange noises?" Haider inquired. "No, I don't know. I was listening to music," Paul uttered, frustration evident in his tone. "Okay," Haider nodded, noting the strain in the family dynamics unsettled him. "So far, I'm not seeing any clear motives, just vague explanations. I need to understand how your relationships worked. There's more to uncover here." "Why are you implying we're all suspects?" Eleanor shot back, disbelief in her voice. "We just lost our son." "I ask these questions because everything I discover helps track down the killer," Haider replied evenly, meeting her gaze. "Someone here is holding back. You can't ignore that reality." Julia's voice quivered. "What if this is someone outside the family? Someone wanting to hurt us?" "Or someone wanting to hurt Richard," Haider said, gauging their reactions closely. A sudden loud crash ricocheted from the adjoining room, followed by startled gasps. Patrol officers rushed to check the source but returned to explain the picture frames cluttering the floor, remnants of a family portrait that had ironically captured happier times. Eleanor's expression twisted, torn between sudden anger and grief. "Not only did we lose my son, now this," she exclaimed, pointing at the broken frames. "Please, calm down," Haider implored, seeing the fraught tension building again. "This estate has seen too much turmoil. You all need to focus." Was there anyone outside the normal family dynamics who may have wanted Richard hurt? Someone who had grievances, an enemy perhaps. Eleanor sighed heavily, her voice lowering. "There has always been rivalry in our world. But Richard, he was always the likable one, almost too good, if you ask me. He never made enemies." As he watched elder members of the family exchange worried glances, Haider sensed that their polished lives hid deeper fractures. He considered how this was not just a story of loss, but perhaps a tale of betrayal, envy, and deeply buried resentments that could have set the stage for murder. "Tell me about relationships outside the family. Any arguments, threats, anything of concern?" he probed, shifting the conversation towards their wider social spheres. "I don't keep any confidants aside from my family," Paul said defensively, his eyes darting towards his mother. Julia sighed. "But there was Philip, a fiendish co-worker who always had it in for Richard. He seemed jealous of his accomplishments." "Really?" Haider's interest peaked as he jotted down that lead. Richard and Philip were competitive, Julia explained. They were both vying for the same promotion. After Richard was given lead, Philip didn't take it well, Eleanor added, her damp eyes reflecting a new concern. It was hushed, but word got around that Philip said some unpleasant things about Richard. "Where can I find him?" Haider said, resolved to bring that potential suspect into the light of his investigation. "I can get you his number," Julia volunteered, a spark of hope illuminating her features. "But it might be best for you to meet him at his office tomorrow. He might have insights given their workplace rivalry." Haider nodded, understanding the complexity that encased their lives. As each family member gradually began to thaw, raw emotion started to change the narrative for the investigation. However, Haider remained acutely aware that each truth unearthed could also bring forth deeper mysteries, and he was prepared to dig further into the tangled web of lies that surrounded the Blackwood family. The investigation unfolded, revealing secrets lurking beneath the surface like shadows cast by flickering candlelight. The morning sun filled the room with an uninvited brightness as Haider sat at his desk, surrounded by notes and the collected whispers of the previous night's revelations. The mystery of Richard Blackwood's murder unraveled in delicate threads, each one leading him deeper into a landscape faintly reminiscent of a twisted family saga. Haider was informed that Philip Acosta had agreed to meet him, so he set off toward the bustling corporate building where Philip worked. As he entered the glass doors, the bright interior contrasted sharply with the tension running through him. Time ticked away like a runaway clock, amplifying the sense that with every minute, the truth could slip further from his grasp. "Detective Graves?" a voice called out. A tall man stepped forward, his suit tailored and his demeanor polished, yet Haider recognized the simmering tension beneath the surface. "I'm Philip Acosta. We can talk in my office." As they walked through the cubicles, Haider noted the glances from colleagues, curiosity, concern, and judgment. Philip ushered him into a corner office, a stark contrast to the elaborate decor at Oakridge Manor. This room was devoid of personal touches, every item meticulously placed, a mirror of Philip's cold demeanor. "Thank you for meeting with me," Haider started, taking a seat. "I understand your relationship with Richard was competitive." Philip leaned back, arms crossed defensively. "We had our spats. Who doesn't in a high-stakes environment? But murder. I can't believe it. Richard was one of the finest at the firm." Haider remained unconvinced. "You weren't happy when Richard got promoted. Was there more to it?" "Look, I worked hard for that promotion." "But so did he." "There's a difference between rivalry and murder," Philip insisted, irritation boiling beneath his calm facade. "What can you tell me about Richard's personal life? Anyone outside the family who might have posed a threat?" Haider inquired. "I barely knew his personal life. He usually kept it separate. In fact, I didn't even know he had family tension until recently," Philip admitted, begrudgingly. "But you should speak to Sarah. She mentioned that Richard was acting differently before he died." Haider's interest spiked. "Sarah." "His girlfriend," Philip explained, finally softening. "She worked at the company too, but rumor has it, they broke it off last week before his death. It could have had some impact." "Where can I find her?" Haider pressed. "She should still be in town." "I'll send you her contact information," Philip said, his voice becoming tinged with ambiguity, a mix of concern and growing guilt. "You believe I could have—" "I believe you had a motive, Philip," Haider interrupted. "But does that mean you went that far? Once I determine the facts surrounding Richard's death, I'll know where I'm headed with all of this." Haider left the office, feeling conflicted about Philip. Was he merely competing or hiding something darker? He needed answers and had a new direction, to track down Sarah and understand the ramifications of the broken relationship. Upon returning to Oakridge Manor, Haider assembled the Blackwood family once again. While they still mourned Richard, their emotional states had adjusted to the reality of the investigation. The shock now morphed into anger, questioning, and raw vulnerability. "Where's Julia?" Haider asked, looking around. "She's been uncharacteristically quiet," Paul responded, concern etching the lines of his face. "I don't know. We all just feel so lost." "Lost?" Eleanor echoed incredulously. "What about our family? Our reputation?" "Mother," Paul's frustration broke the calm. "This is bigger than that. We can't pretend everything's all right. Julia hasn't even been in touch since last night. Haider recognized the tension that brewed precariously. I'll give you space to reconnect. Julia needed this time to herself. Meanwhile, I plan to speak to Sarah. I'll keep you updated afterward. The air grew dense as Haider prepared for his next visit, his instincts sharp as he contemplated the dynamics within the family and their hidden complexities. The rendezvous with Sarah held promise as it might reveal more about Richard's tensions beyond the family unit. Haider navigated his way through the quiet streets of the suburb where Sarah lived. Rumors floated about their past relationship, and he wondered what kinds of revelations hid within this young woman. As he pulled up to her apartment complex, he worked to suppress the unease that had settled in the pit of his stomach. Sarah answered the door cautiously. Upon seeing Haider, her demeanor shifted from apprehension to raw sadness. "Detective Graves, can we talk in here?" Haider stepped inside, feeling the weight of her grief. She was disheveled, heavy dark circles shadowing her eyes, a stark indication of sleepless nights. "I can't believe he's gone. I just saw him not long ago," she murmured, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry for your loss," Haider replied gently. "I need to ask you some questions about Richard and your relationship." Sarah nodded, tears welling again. "We'd been dating for nearly a year. But things had turned sour lately. We broke it off only days before he died." "Why? What changed between you two?" Haider asked, aware of the thresholds of pain opening up. It was a combination of things: work stress, family pressure. "I sensed Richard was going through something but didn't know how deep it ran." Her voice cracked, anguish underlying her words. "Did he mention any threats? Any enemies?" Haider pressed. "It was strange. He mentioned someone at work who didn't like him. I didn't take it seriously then. Richard joked about it, said Philip was jealous of his recent accomplishments." Sarah's voice quivered, and she paused to wipe her tears. "But he said he'd deal with it." "That's concerning. Do you think Philip could have taken it too far?" Haider asked, feeling each thin thread of the mystery pull taut. Sarah hesitated, searching inside for the truth. "I don't want to think that. But he did seem frustrated. Richard mentioned he might have to confront him." Haider felt the darkness encroach. Was there ever anyone else who put pressure on him? Any family drama? Yes, certainly. His family had rigid expectations. Eleanor always pushed him to meet her standard. "Perfect son, perfect everything," Sarah said. "It's suffocating if you ask me. There's a lot expected of him." Haider took note of this. The weight of parental expectations could drive motives to dangerous places. "Thank you, Sarah. You've been extremely helpful. I'll need to follow up with you later." "Will you find out who did this?" she asked, voice trembling, vulnerability showing in her eyes. "I will," he promised, stealing one last look at the portrait of a smiling Richard that hung on her wall, caught within the vibrant memories that spiraled into the void of tragedy. As he exited her apartment, Haider felt a weight pressed down on him. He now had interlinked relationships, evolving secrets, and growing trepidation surrounding Richard's past. As the day wore on and night fell, Haider returned to Oakridge Manor, determined to confront the Blackwood family once again. With the case now tangible, Haider settled in to confront the family, piecing together the puzzle of how each person was enmeshed in Richard's life and subsequent death. He gathered them in the study, the setting hauntingly familiar, yet fraught with new revelations. "I believe we have critical information that needs discussing," Haider began, pacing the imposing room, his gaze unwaveringly steady on their faces. "This goes beyond just murder. It's about understanding who Richard was and what burdened him." Eleanor, arms crossed, watched him suspiciously. "We already know he was impulsive and didn't worry about the consequences of his actions." Haider held up a hand. "That's not what I'm implying. I've spoken to several sources, including Sarah. It seems like Richard didn't just fear external threats. There's a tension woven through your family. One that could lead to deadly results." Silence hung in the air thickly. "Richard mentioned Philip at work, a competitive rival, and it appears they had unresolved issues," Haider said. "But the family dynamics are more perplexing. Eleanor, you constantly pushed him. Didn't you? Even Julia and Paul hinted at it. Eleanor's eyes narrowed coldly. She didn't flinch. Richard had everything handed to him. He refused to take responsibility. He was never satisfied, despite having every opportunity. Haider pressed on, concerned. Paul, how did you feel about Richard before his death? I admired him. I wanted to be like him, he said, frustration boiling. But it always seemed I could never measure up. I just didn't want to lose him. He was becoming something else, taking chances to break free. He wanted autonomy over his life, Julia supplied carefully, sharing furtive glances with her brother. Did that create rifts? Haider inquired, gauging their reactions. Eleanor shifted uncomfortably. Maybe I pushed him too hard, but it was only because I loved him. He was my everything. Haider sensed the cracks deepening in their emotional defenses. Love can take many forms, and sometimes turn into obsession. Where did it lead? We clashed on numerous occasions, Eleanor responded. Frustration seeped into her words, but I never intended for things to escalate. Haider detected the fragility cloaked just beneath Eleanor's bravado. What happened last week? Was there another argument? Paul glanced at Eleanor. I didn't witness anything, but my gut tells me. It was about the promotion I was working towards. Richard. His role made me uncomfortable. Julia's voice trembled. You think Richard's death is connected to something deeper? Haider considered every word. I need to know. Did Richard confront Philip regarding work, or was there more? What do you mean more? Paul interjected, confusion unraveling on his features. Haider hesitated, weighing his options. There may have been elements of jealousy blooming within family relations too. Between siblings, parents, and between lovers, things that fester over time. Secrets can sometimes turn deadly. I held no animosity toward Richard, Paul said, eyes wide. I might not know the answer, but can we trust Philip with this? Julia said. Why do we keep bringing him back? Eleanor interrupted, clearly agitated. He's nothing but a nuisance. Could it have been him? Haider snapped, cutting through the rising tension. He needed to provoke thought, allow the family to face fears they'd buried. Just as easily as it could be one of you. I was here. Paul claimed vehemently, rattled. I would never hurt Richard. When families are torn apart by competitiveness, both love and hatred intertwine, Haider remarked, sensing a new fracture among them. An unsteady silence swept through the study, uncertainty twisting into knots of anxiety. Their emotional core began to fray. A tempest was winding its way through the family as Haider prepared for the inevitable fallout. Someone is hiding among you, and the truth can hide in the shadows, he surged, calculated to spur deeper reflection. If we want justice for Richard, you need to release your secrets now. As he stepped back, the room imprinted the moment. Deep cracks forged themselves in their relationships, and Haider knew the lingering pain of resentment would only be exacerbated by the unfolding situation. The atmosphere inside Oak Ridge Manor had shifted since Haider's last visit. What once echoed with laughter now reverberated with hushed whispers, confined breath, and the solemn weight of an unresolved tragedy. The family was held captive by grief, yet something deeper nagged at the edges of Haider's consciousness, the notion that the culprit lived with them. As Haider prepared for another meeting with the family, he arranged his thoughts and browsed through his notes, weaving through the lies and half-truths. Each statement had a layer. The core of their lives delved into more profound anxieties and rivalries than he had initially anticipated. Detective. Eleanor entered, her expression tinged with exhaustion. Do you have more leads? We've sought clarity all night. Just a few questions, Mrs. Blackwood, Haider replied, observing the fissures of vulnerability in her demeanor. Can you tell me more about what Richard feared concerning Philip? Richard never liked sharing details. He wouldn't ever admit it out loud, but it's true. I sense tensions brewing there, she confessed, voice shaking. But I never thought it'd lead to murder. Philip always seemed like a dog barking, good at causing noise but harmless. It's easy to underestimate a rival when the stakes are high, Haider said. You trusted Richard's judgment over yours, even when it came to office politics? Yes, she said tersely. Richard was my son. I believed he would make the right choices. Haider made a mental note of that. Julia stepped forward, her lips pressed in concern. I want to point out that Richard's pressure didn't just stem from work. The pressure from the family weighed him down, perhaps more than anything, she said, her voice low. Whether it pushed him away or into Philip's hands. Tell me about their last interaction, Haider prompted. There was strange behavior, Julia recalled, furrowing her brow. They must have seen each other the day before. I could sense something was off. Did he tell you about it? Haider asked. No, she faltered, but her eyes betrayed the unease. I can only speculate. Something cracked between them. Eleanor, have you talked to Philip since Richard's death? Yes, we exchanged a few texts about the upcoming funeral, she replied, her tone frustrated. Did he seem agitated? Haider studied her reactions closely. He expressed disbelief, but it felt forced. Almost like a veil covering guilt, Eleanor shifted nervously. But how could I accuse him of anything? I didn't see anything. But you've described a rivalry, Haider observed. Were there threats exchanged? Anything that could indicate anger? Eleanor shook her head. None that I know of. Someone would have mentioned it. Haider cut abruptly before returning to the crux of the matter. Tell me what anyone might have sensed about tensions brewing with Richard personally. What about Sarah? I don't know how much more I can divulge, Julia said, defeated. Sometimes it's not what you say, but what you don't, Haider reiterated. Consider what you notice about the dynamics. Family loyalty versus rivalry. It can twist relationships. Paul inked a crease over his forehead. When I last saw Richard speak to Philip, what caught my attention was how they were both uninviting to each other. So much energy was spent in that room, all those unspoken words. Did I ignore it? Haider read into Paul's guilt, searching for that turning point. It sounds like a pivotal moment for investigation. A persistent unease gripped the room, and Eleanor shifted uneasily. Is it possible someone from our own household had something to gain by eliminating Richard? Someone close. The idea hung in the air, a murmur of personal betrayal festering beneath perceived familial loyalty. The labyrinthine tracks of deception widened, and Haider was aware that the emotional stakes in this case ran deeper than mere rivalry. Let's get everything on the table, and we'll peel back each layer till we arrive at the truth, Haider suggested gently, voice rising to inspire confidence. What if there's more at play? Julia's voice trembled, eyes raw with vulnerability. What if someone we trusted used Richard against us? There it was. The ripple transformed into a wave, stirring fear within them that could unearth buried grudges or resentments they'd never aired out. It echoed, deceit always wore a common face. And Haider knew this family might harbor secrets deep enough to swallow lives whole. The haunting promise of truth loomed ominously, if only he could navigate these shadows. As the investigation spiraled into deeper emotional layers, Haider's reflections weighed heavily on him. He had gathered fragmented pieces, the relationship tensions, Greg's unsaid threats, and seconds of uncertainty. But now he aimed to confront the rough truths leading to Richard's murder, unraveling their veils of deceit. For the final aid, Haider arranged another confrontation with Philip. I need clarity, he told him, face to face now. This situation is unforgivingly intricate, and with every layer I shed, it leads back to you. It's absurd. Philip spat back defensively. I have nothing to do with this. Haider studied him, shaking his head slowly. But you do continue to play a role. Even before Richard's untimely death, you existed within the shadows, yet kept an innocent facade. Did you build on anger? Did it lead to confrontation? Philip hesitated, gauging his immediate reaction. I didn't like him. Irked me no end. Richard envied my sense of control. But I never imagined this would happen. Haider continued, unwavering. Forgive me, but your reputational loss doesn't justify murder. Philip flared up. But you think that I'd actually kill someone? No. Desperation has driven others before. And I must connect the dots. Disclosures between Sarah, Eleanor, and Julia. Family dynamics are threaded too closely for comfort. I don't know how I can help you. Philip cried out, panic dawning. Haider seized the opportunity. Tell me more about your altercations with Richard. Did you see anything indicating he wanted to confront you? Philip finally put his hands up in resignation. I told you. We had arguments, but I never viewed them as tense burdens to fuel death. A tense pause initiated the silence. There were possibilities. Confrontation could lead to irreversible outcomes. What did Richard say last you spoke? I don't know. Just that I crossed lines and he wouldn't let it stand, Philip whispered, fear etched across his features, slowly seething with recognition. Haider knotted it all together. He saw you not just as a rival but as a clear, and very present, threat. What if during that confrontation, he not only confronted you but his family? What if you were backed into a corner? I didn't kill him. I didn't see him. Philip snapped, desperation replacing anger. Haider stepped away like a puppeteer, deliberately orchestrating the chaos around him. Carefully plotting the dependency amidst complex relationships, he ventured back toward the manor where emotions hung heavy with tension. As the investigation drew to a close, the atmosphere in Oakridge Manor felt heavy with the ghosts of unresolved emotions. Richard's death had left profound scars across the Blackwood family, forcing long-concealed secrets to the surface. He hoped that in shedding light on their darkness, he could help them rebuild, albeit a fractured existence. In the dim study, surrounded by the remnants of fractured lives, Eleanor, Julia, and Paul found common ground. Sorrow birthed through mortality. They would deliberate the terms of their relationship, chart the course from hurt to healing, and face the raw wounds transformed within a shared tragedy. Haider stood, contemplative, at the threshold of the room, allowing them space as he made one last call. With each moment, he understood their emotional travails. Every family bore a weight of expectations, legacies, imperfections, and the impact of love turned toxic. As memories and truths faded into whispers, he was resolved in one certainty. The heart of every family harbored complex shadows underneath their fabric. Torn between love and rivalry, it was essential they redefine the essence of their legacy, learning lessons amidst unyielding grief. And above all, as he walked away, he hoped they learned how to cherish the memory of those gone rather than transform it into shackles binding them to a haunted past. For every mystery culminated in understanding, and his purpose became a reflection in discovering truth artfully hidden within the deadly game they had played when they deemed love to be their ultimate deception.